Okay, it's a couple of minutes past 2 Atlantic, so I guess we'll begin. My name is Bernie Daigle, and I look after knowledge transfer for the Atlantic Forestry Center. Bonjour à tous, je m'appelle Bernard Daigle et puis je m'occupe du transfert de connaissances pour le Centre de foresterie de l'Atlantique. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais souligner quelques remarques d'ordre administratif. Before starting, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. As was stated in the email invitation, this presentation will be given in English. You should also know that the presentation is being recorded. PDFs of the presentation, both in French and English, are in the chat and can be downloaded. Comme indiqué dans le courriel d'invitation, cette présentation sera donnée en anglais. Vous devriez aussi savoir que la présentation sera enregistrée. Les PDF de la présentation en français et en anglais sont dans le chat et peuvent être téléchargés. Nous vous demandons d'utiliser l'icône de questions-réponses qui est située en bas de votre écran pour poser vos questions. Les questions peuvent être posées soit en anglais ou en français. Nous allons attendre jusqu'à la fin de la présentation pour répondre aux questions. We ask that you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and those will be answered at the end of the presentation. I will now pass it over to Donnie McPhee. Donnie is the coordinator of the National Tree Seed Center and will be giving today's presentation. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à Donnie McPhee. Donnie est coordonnateur du Centre national de semences forestières et donnera la présentation d'aujourd'hui.
Well, thank you, Bernie. And,
Donnie.
yep. So hopefully you can hear me and the presentation is up on the screen. Good. So welcome, everyone, and welcome to this first seminar in a series of seminars geared towards for those looking for support in areas related to the seed supply chain of forest, trees, and shrubs in Canada. As Bernie mentioned, my name is Donnie McPhee, and I'm the coordinator here at the National Tree Seed Center. And we're located in Fredericton, New Brunswick, out on the east coast here on a rainy spring day. And we reside on the traditional lands of the Wolastoqey First Nations. I'm representing our knowledge mobilization team, which is led by Melissa Spearin and Kieran Vault. And then we have background and technical support by Naren Hay and Bernie Daigle, who are also part of our knowledge mobilization team. While we are physically located on the traditional lands of the Wolastoqey, we also want to acknowledge that we conduct our work on a wide range of territories and treaty lands of numerous and diverse Indigenous nations, and we pay tribute to their heritage and legacy. While I will not be speaking specifically about the 2 Billion Tree Program, I do want to say that while the program is about climate change mitigation, it's also about a wide host of ecosystem and nature-based solutions. And as a service center with the Canadian Forest Service and Natural Resource Canada, we really felt it was about us using the tools in our box to support the program. And that's sort of what has led us here to this seminar series. This is the first of a series of seminars aimed to support small to medium-sized enterprises, communities, and regional collaborators that are looking to either start or to increase their capacity regarding seed collection, processing, and storage. While we have our first 4 seminars already scheduled, and you can see the dates here and the topics, additional webinars will be determined with feedback from you, the participants, off this seminar. And just a reminder, as Bernie said, that any questions you want to ask, just put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. And we also ask to try to keep them related to the presentation and not to the 2 Billion Year Program, because that's not really our focus or mandate. The National Tree Seed Center will follow up with the recordings, resources, and Q&A documentation to the participants afterwards, so that you have, so again, if you don't get to ask your question or it's not addressed today, we will address it and send the responses out at a later time. So the goal of this whole thing is to get you thinking and planning regarding the tools and small scale equipment you may need for the task of seed collecting and processing. And again, just to be more efficient. thus giving you better seed yield and hence saving you time and money in the long run. Someone has their mic on. They're not muted, so I can hear. And a couple of things for you to think about as we get into this presentation. So do you have land that you're currently planning to plant seedlings on? And that's just not, places you're thinking of, but do you actually have permits and clearance to do so? And then you should be thinking about, is the land ecologically appropriate for the species you want, or more, are the species available for that particular ecosystem where I want to plant? Another thing you should be thinking about already, do we have nurseries lined up to grow our seedlings, or are we prepared to start a nursery to grow our own seedlings? Is the sourced seed available for the desired species you're looking to plant? And if they're not, how are you going to go about acquiring the seed needed from those particular species you want to plant? So is your organization willing to collect this seed or hire people to do so? And if so, are you prepared to do it in such a way that you follow regional regulations and guidelines so that the seed that you do collect is usable and of good quality to be used within the program? And if all those things, if you're thinking about that stuff, then this is the seminar series for you. So just a couple of slides here, just to give you a little background about the National Tree Seed Centre, just in case you're not familiar. So we were established in 1967 in Petawawa, Ontario. And the focus of the Seed Centre was on obtaining and storing and providing native Canadian tree seed of known origin for research. It was in these early years that the CFS and the Seed Centre worked with our provincial counterparts and seed centres to develop the tree breeding programs that are still in place today. And much of the seed used in the industrial sector comes from these well-established and well-run programs. In 1996, the Seed Centre moved to Fredericton, New Brunswick, and this coincided with new commitments to the Convention of Biodiversity and the Federal Species at Risk Act. And what this means is that our mandate shifted, and it started to include things like shrubs and the conservation of forest genetic resources that were under threat by things such as invasive pests and pathogens, and now lately climate change. Over this 50-year history, the Seed Centre has gained expertise in collecting and distributing seed for research and collaborating on conservation recovery programs, along with innovations in small-scale seed handling, testing, and storage protocols. So in that 50-year history, we've worked with over 400 different species. With the announcement of the 2 Billion Tree Program, we envision that there may be potential seed-related gaps regarding the resources and training materials available to partners of the program. Now, different regions of the country will have varying degrees of expertise and support available to you. We are simply trying to do our best to work with the organizations that do work in this field in those regions and help fill the gaps where they do exist. So we've been working together with these collaborators to put together this series of seminars, along with a host of videos and documents aimed to support knowledge exchange and training efforts as it relates to the seed component of the program. And this brings us to our first set of polling questions. By answering these questions, you will help us identify the best way to support you moving forward. So while you're filling out these the polls, I'm going to slowly move along here. So why do we need seed? So there are the three big R's: reforestation, restoration, and reclamation, that historically have required large amounts of seed from our forest industry and our seed centers. While the National Tree Seed Centre does supply some seed and work with researchers working in these areas, our role would really be small scale and research driven. Most of the seed and seedlings needed to support this work is produced by our provincial or provincially regulated seed centers and nurseries. As the 2 Billion Tree Program is focused on the restoration component and not the reforestation and reclamation part, it's really focused on plantings that are in addition to what's already legally regulated to be planted. In addition, I just want to mention that while it is about planting trees, the long-term benefits to the program are also considered. So it's not just about carbon sequestration, it's also about the benefits like the social and the ecological benefits that go along with it. The program is aimed at using the right seed sources from the desired appropriate species to the right place. As such, this will require new georeferenced seed collection sources that are not currently readily available, or at least not at the quantities required. And based on all the data that we have, it'll probably take about 11 billion seeds to produce these 2 billion seedlings in the ground that we're looking for in this program. While this is going to be a challenge here in Canada, we also want to acknowledge that we are not alone in working towards finding solutions to these challenges. And as noted on the two papers here, the 2018 global study and then the 2021 study, referred to on this slide, that seed supply of the appropriate tree and shrub species, it's a global issue. But even with this expected shortage, in the first couple of years or the first year of the program, I know there was a recent article that put out that said there was 1.8 million trees that were planted, but we've been informed by the program that it's actually closer to 30 million. It's just that those extra trees haven't been reported yet. And so that's why you've seen anything saying 8.5. It really is closer to 30 million trees are in the ground, using over 50 different species planted out in over 500 different sites. So all to say is that there's an enormous opportunity for small to medium-sized enterprises based on the needs of this program. And this brings us to our second set of polling questions. As we mentioned, we want to gear our presentation to your needs so that we can, we can customize and design our presentations based for you. But we're also willing, if there's smaller groups here that have specific needs, we can design presentations and give them to your small groups based on your needs. Again, as long as you give us ample time. And we ask for 30 to 60 days notice so we can put that together for you. So with all that background information, let's get into the presentation itself. So finding the right tools for the task at hand when it comes to seed collecting and processing. The tools we discuss in the upcoming deck are by no means the only ones that can be used. And if you are listening on this and you know and use other tools that you find to be highly effective, and if you don't mind sharing them, please do. We're always interested in seeing what other people are using and how effective it is. But all we can say is that these are the tools that we've found via 50 years of trial and error that work for us. So we're going to go through a series of slides here, focusing in on these seven points. And the first one is field gear. And again, we're not going to talk specifically about a lot of the stuff in here. Mainly because in our upcoming seminars, we'll deep dive into appropriate gear for appropriate species. But having the right tools in the field can make all the difference between you having a successful day or not. Listed on this slide are the tools that we carry in our seed collection toolkit. So everything here fits into our nice little bucket here. But mind you, this is for collecting seed collections for research, like smaller seed lots. You might find that you need more aggressive tools for larger scale collections. Much like much of the gear and tools we present here today, the actual specifics on how we use them, again, will come in later seminars. But today's seminar is really about just presenting you with options of tools and methods that you may want to consider if you're planning becoming involved in the seed collecting, process, and storage. So again, everything that you see, all this presentation, we're providing it to you, so you don't have to take notes. And also, we'll be providing you links to resources and where you can find these, but just realize depending on what region you're in, the availability might vary based on suppliers. And that's one of the reasons for getting all this information out to you now, because we know there are issues with supply chain for all materials these days. To ensure your collections are of the greatest value for your personal organizations or your clients' needs, maintaining seed lot identification is of uttermost importance. No matter where you are collecting seed from, there will be provincial regulations and guidelines that you need to adhere to. So please do the research into finding out what those regulations are. They are there to ensure that the proper genotypes are being used in our planting efforts. So even if you're collecting seed for your own purposes to be planted on your own lands, under your own organizational jurisdictions, it's still very important and value added to maintain seed lot identification. Without this information, most seed processing facilities, including our own, simply can't or will not process the seed if it's to be used in this program. Using seed collected from unknown provinces being locations, are not supported by this program, except I'd have to say in certain urban settings, where say maybe urban settings are not normal natural settings, and maybe there just aren't appropriate naturally occurring native species that are suitable for some of those urban settings, and exceptions can be made for those settings. Okay. Once seed is collected, the two things you really need to start focusing on is temperature and humidity of the seed lots. Seed lots. We want to start drying and cooling our seed lots down, reducing the weight of them, and then removing the undesirable non-seed debris, and that's reducing the bulk as soon as possible. There are some very useful, inexpensive tools available to help you monitor RH, so relative humidity of all your storage areas. And we really find this Kessler, which you can hook it right up to your iPhone. So you can put the Kessler in with your seed lot anywhere, and you have up-to-date information at your fingertips on your phone to know what the status of that seed is. And depending on the species and classification of the seed and seed lot, if it's orthodox, so orthodox would be your smaller seed that can handle drying down, like your pines, your spruces, a lot of your maples, your hemlocks, populus, and birches, as opposed to the recalcitrant seed. So recalcitrant seed, I mentioned this term later, it's your oaks and your hickories, those big nut-bearing trees, butternut, beech, silver maple falls into that. But depending on what species, you might find that you need a variety of drying type areas. And also, depending on the species collected and the size of your collections and the locations where you're at, you might find that some of it can be done outside. So this is a cone drying facility just outside, again, racks. The cones are stored in burlap sacks, so lots of airflow. But even with this, you really have to make sure you're flipping those nuts, so those bags, so that heat isn't building up in the center of the bags. And again, all this information we'll be providing to you. Good. Okay. So how fast and to what degree of moisture removal is required? And again, it can be very species dependent. So this is an example showing silver maple. It's a recalcitrant species. Again, the seed does not handle drying down. And the seed is produced in the spring. And for us, we found that, when you collect the seed, it's at about 50 to 58%. We can only dry it down between 43 and 47%. Any lower than 38%, and your viability starts to really drop off. So when you collect the seed, you have to really be careful, because it might only take 24 hours or sometimes even less in a drying room before it gets to that 43%. And when it gets to that, you want to stop it. That's where you need to store it at, so it's of highest value. Another example here, in 2019, we had a range-wide buffer crop of black ash. And again, black ash only comes into seed every 7 years. It's listed in many provinces now as endangered because of emerald ash borer. And in that year, working with our collaborators, we made over 400 single tree collections. And at that time, we weren't set up with a really good drying rack system. Again, we're talking about November, December, outdoor collection storage wasn't possible. So for us, we really we stored all the seed in a humidity controlled room at 28%, but all these bags had to be shaken and stirred up on a daily basis to make sure that the seed wasn't gathering moisture and heat inside. And that was done until we had a time to process the seed. These are drying racks here with cones. So again, this is sort of in our normal humidity controlled room. So we have all kinds of drying racks, again, where we can keep a nice close eye on all of our seed lots. For certain species, there is an urgency to getting the seed processed really quickly. So this is that's the case with poplar and salix species. In nature, this set of species, when the seed releases and hits the ground, when they're released from the catkins, biologically, they're ready to germinate as soon as they hit the ground and if moisture is available. So based on that, you really have to be quick with your seed collection and processing. So I know in the Alberta Seed Matters, so Alberta, much drier than say the Maritimes, they recommend that your seed should be shipped within 3 days after collection to the extraction facilities, laid out to dry. And then they're recommending that the seed really needs to be extracted in 7 to 14 days. But here in Fredericton on the East Coast, we have really high humidity in the spring. So we've actually found that we have to collect, get it to our facility, and actually have it cleaned and processed in 4 to 7 days if we're going to ensure high quality. So again, on this slide here, again, this is sort of your basic catkin. And when you do your collections, when the seed catkin, when the little, oh my God, losing words here, but when they're starting to open up and fluff. So when we make our collections, this is basically what the seed looks like. We take it, we put it in a drying rack, and after 24 hours, this is what it looks like. The fluff all releases. And then we put all of this into a seed tumbler, apply heat, and the seed is released from that fluff. So again, I mentioned the tumbler, and this seed tumbler is one of the most versatile pieces of equipment we have. It can be used for cones, for catkins, and a range of other species. And at the end of this presentation, we'll actually share the manufacturer's contact for it. But if it's out of your price range, you can still get by with a series of sieves and pails to do the same thing. Probably not quite at the same, getting the same yield out of your seed, because again, it's really hard sometimes to get the seed off that fluff, and that's where the tumbler really helps. But you still can manage to get good quantities of seed in a nice dry room using sieves. So up to this stage, really we focusing on the drying and removal of the seed from the reproductive structures that house the seed, so the catkins and the cones. But removing the wings and appendages can add to the quality of the seed lots, making them easier to handle and can greatly reduce the storage footprint. So again, this is sort of just what we're talking about is removing either the wings or the samara from different seed lots. And again, if you can remove those wings, you really are reducing the size. So again, there's lots of positives, but there's also some cons, and you really have to consider this because it is a little bit time consuming and labor intensive to get off those wings. And we use a series of bags. We do a lot of hand rubbing. It doesn't take that long, but we use, this is a Kevlar bag here that was used on ash, but we would use this here as just a cloth bag that's used for a lot of our spruces and maples. But again, just gently rubbing. There are other species such as a lot of your conifers that might have resin sacs, so you really have to be a very, very light rub. But again, you can reduce your storage volume by 50 to 90%. So if you're using the seed next year, maybe it's not worth your effort. But if you have to store seed in large volumes of it, and storage space is an issue, then maybe it is worth your effort to do so. And this is just another quick example here of dewinged and non-dewinged. So this is ironwood. So ironwood, the wings or the samara, the outer seed coat there that has that house the ironwood seed, they have little barbs. If anyone's worked with ironwood, little almost like little prickly stinging nettle type barbs. So by hand rubbing it, we can get rid of that. It makes it way easier to use. And this is another tool that we use for larger seed lots. It's called a Westrup. So this is ash seed, green ash seed, I believe here. So again, the piece of equipment, again, we provide this information. It's a little bit on the expensive side. So if you're using large volumes, it's a huge time saver. So again, you can see the difference by putting in the seed with the samara and then the finished product. And this is, less than 30 seconds. It's a series of brushes that sort of take off the wings. So again, we reduce our footprint by almost 66% by doing this. For fleshy fruits, an assortment of over-the-counter food processes devices can be modified, including, again, food processors, blenders, milkshake makers. But a couple of things just to mind is that make sure you're using plastic blades, or you can also wrap the blades or blunt them so that you're not doing damage to the seed. Another tool that we use, and we'll call this a big food processor, but it's a DigVig. It's a great tool. The manufacturer says that it's been used for over 200 different species in North America. It can be used for both dry threshing, so things like ash and sugar maple, but it's can use for wet maceration to get wings and fruity tissue off seed effectively as well. So now that we have the seed out of the cones and the catkins or all the fruit removed, Wings and other appendages removal at this time. We want to do that to increase purity, and then remove all the dust, dirt, wings, scales, and other inert material, including broken and empty seeds. So we do this by assortment of methods that separate seed by size, shape, weight, and specific gravity. If you're looking in the literature, one of the things you're going to find is most wildwood species in Canada is outside of conifers and a few hardwoods. There's really not a lot of representation in the scientific studies or in general information that's out there on how to do this. They can be incredibly variable in terms of size and shape, morphology, and even pest and pathogen infestation, and the proportion of empty seeds. This is probably the most difficult aspect of the equipment solutions to think ahead to and to spend money and effort on wisely. And again, one thing we really encourage is if you're doing your own cleaning is really keep good records of what you started with and what you finished with. And even for your first few years, keeping examples of all the debris you sieved off, just so you have a good idea going back for the next year, just to give you an idea of the processes that you went through to get where you are. And also to give you good ideas of the quantities of seed you're making based on what you collected. Sorry there. So separating first of all by size and shape is one of the most cost-effective methods. With a relatively small investment into a set of sieves and screens, you can do a relatively good job of cleaning your seed. Over time, again, here at the Seed Center, we've accumulated about 50 different sieves and screen sizes, and we find them really invaluable for separating seed from unwanted debris. And again, they come in a wide range of grates and hole patterns and sizes to get rid of, maybe it's to get rid of debris, but maybe it's to let your seed drop down, smaller seed to drop through and keep the debris up above. We also separate by weight. It's another useful method to get rid of all that unwanted debris. And again, that's as long as the debris doesn't weigh the same as your seed. And so these, we have schematics that we can share for this, but this is a zigzag. They all work on airflow. So providing airflow to blow the seed and to separate by different weights. So this is a zigzag. This is called a windrow wizard. But we find for us, again, we use air column aspirators. So we have a wide variety of these aspirators. And for all of our equipment, and excuse me, if you can see me, I'm looking over machine here, but we insert a rheostat onto almost all of our equipment. So it gives us a much wider range and a better control of airflow. So we can use it for a lot of different species. And for certain species, again, for oaks, a simple water flotation works. So again, when you float oak, a water flotation will eliminate all the empties. So all your empties and parasites or damaged seed, most of that stuff will float to the top and you can just skim it off and the good seed sinks. And for other seed lots, we find that we really have to go to a vibration table or a gravity table. And again, this just works on a vibration and it separates by weight again, specific gravity of your seed, separating out the empty on this pitch here and your full seed here. And again, we'll provide all this information. So now we can move into the area of what are affordable ways of storing our collections for short terms. So one of the main methods by which we encourage our collaborators, and this is something we just started in the last four years, I would say, and we use this for storing seed short term or to have our collaborators ship seed to us if it hasn't been fully dried. And we've been using this a lot for reclamation companies. Maybe they're up in the northern part of the range of the species, and they're making their collections and want to get it to them get it to us for us to process. They'll put into these buckets. So it's called a gamma seal lid, and it's a two-piece sealing system that will take a standard bucket, and the bucket, a wide range of buckets can be used on, and it converts them into an airtight container. So this, along with the appropriate amount of desiccant and a moisture reading data logger, is a great short-term solution to either shipping seed or to help dry down seed to that desired moisture content. It's not great for cones or recalcitrant seed, because again, recalcitrant seed needs air exchange. And if you're using it for catkins, just make sure you have to understand that most seed and catkins expand. So you can't jam things in here. You have to leave ample room for expansion as things dry. For long-term storage and maximum seed storage potential, using the right containers can be vital to the life of your seed. So we use, for our research collections, we tend to use mason jars. But just a simple thing, we've really found that using the narrow lid mason jars is way better than the wide rim, just for moisture loss. Now, we do use some of the wide rim, but when we do, we actually have separate smaller containers within the wide rim, again, so we don't have moisture loss. We've been moving a lot of our seed collections into foil seal packages. It's really good. They take up a lot less space, a lot easier to handle, and there's no breakage factor to them. And then we also acknowledge, again, a lot of the larger seed centers, and for real big volumes of seed, using polyethylene containers or polyethylene bags is the way to go for large seed lots. But we have one other thing, sorry, back on this here slide here, is for recalcitrant seed. Again, a lot of this stuff doesn't work, again, because for recalcitrant seed, and again, that's that large fleshy seed, you need gas exchange. So if we are to use large mason jars or containers, we use a Gore-Tex lid on them, which allows for air and gas exchange without moisture loss. Okay, so also the temperature you store your seed in that appropriate container can also vary by seed classification and how long you need to store your seed. So for short-term storage, like over winter, maybe a simple +4 Celsius refrigerator is all you need. But if you are storing your seed for longer than a year, you're going to have to consider, a -2 freezer or possibly a -20, which works really well for a widest variety of orthodox seed, especially if you're storing for more than that 2 to 3 year time period. So while I understand we presented a lot of information at a very superficial level, all of which needs more detail for it to be truly effective to you, our potential users, please recall the goal of this presentation was to get you thinking about potential purchases you might want to consider regarding seed collection and processing tools. So on this slide here, we have a lot of low-cost options designated to get you starting in your seed collection, processing, and storage needs. So again, you all have a copy of this, or you will have a copy of this, so I'm not going to dive into it too much more. For a larger investment, we're suggesting to go with some of the items on this here slide. And just as an example, this is our current dry lab setup. So this is where we process most of our cones and catkins, so our birches, poplars, maples, all of our spruces, pines, all of those dry seed, not our fleshy seeds or our berries. But in this lab here, and again, it's all going to vary. It's going to vary widely on the experience of your staff, the species that you're working at, and the availability of the seed, like if it was a good seed year or not, and the investment you make in the facility and equipment. But again, just an example from this room here with 2 technicians, we process between 10 and 30 million seeds a year using the basic equipment that we have listed here. And again, all of this, we're going to be digging into more in our upcoming seminars as we deal with seasonal collections and processing activities, which are going to be more species specific. And again, the first seminar for that will be on May 10th. As I mentioned, we know that the supply stream for certain equipment is, it's going to be a factor. For this seed tumbler, we have a local manufacturer who we've been working with to develop it. And again, we can provide information, but we find this is probably the most valuable piece of equipment that we use in our seed center. So again, we can provide you with the contact information for the manufacturer if you're interested in. I know he's just shipped one to Yukon Seed this week, I think it went out. And prior to COVID, there were 11 others that he shipped it out to seed centers in the eastern part of Canada. Good. So regionally, you're going to find there's different levels of support and infrastructures available to assist you in your seed collecting and processing endeavors. And maybe all that we can do for you is maybe hook you up with the right organizations in your region. And again, maybe it's just a matter of you working closely with forest professionals in your region to find out what resources are there. But again, feel free to reach out to us and we'll do our best to help you out. You know, different regions across the country will have varying degrees of resources available and support in the field of seed collections, processing, and storage off tree and shrub species. We're simply trying to do our best to work with these organizations that work in this field and fill gaps where they exist. So beside the documents that we've been sharing with you, and we're willing to be sharing to the ones I talked about, what are some of the other services that we can help you out with in support of the 2 Billion Tree program? So one of the things that we find it's a real hit with our current collaborators is real-time text-to-picture or iNatural ID. So basically, if you're in the field, you're going to the field, and you want to know, is seed ready? You know, taking a quick picture, texting it to us, or putting it on iNaturalist, we can give you, you know, responses either, you know, right on cue or within the next 24 hours, letting you know sort of our feel for what we're seeing. And maybe we can guide you through on how to do proper cut tests and let you know if they're ripe and ready to pick. We can also customize collection calendars. So if you have species you're looking to collect and you say, well, I don't really know when they should be ready, using our data and data from other seed centers across the country, you know, we can help you hone in to the window that you should be looking at on when you should be making those collections. Also, again, we work with a whole series of collaborators across the country that send us seed for testing. And we just want to say that anything you send us, it doesn't replace provincial registration and tester policies, but it gives you maybe value added to your seed collections. If you're looking for us to do a lot of this work, a lot of times we look to sign MOUs with you and partner with you in it. But by doing that, you know, we can provide you with digital x-rays, filled versus empty seed if you send us seed lots. And again, the amount of seed you send us, we would follow the ISTA, which is the International Seed Testing Association guidelines. But with the appropriate quantity of seed, we can do x-rays, we can do ERH and moisture content, 1,000 seed weight. And then we can also recommend specific germination tests and do those for you potentially. But that would all be as part of an MOU. Some of the things we're currently doing with 2 Billion Trees is that, again, a lot of our seed centers are used to dealing with conifer species and not with hardwoods and shrubs. So already we've been providing a wide range of nurseries from across the country with samples of these species so they can start formulating, well, how does the current equipment they have and the resources they currently have work with these unique and different size seed. So we're working with a whole bunch of nurseries across the country, providing them, you know, samples so that they can work out the processes so they're ready for hopefully increase collections coming in to their nurseries. And just a couple of last slides before we get into the question period. So this is our current team. Naren Haight, who I mentioned earlier, and Mary Knockwood are they run our Indigenous Seed program, which you may have heard was just announced a few weeks ago. Roger Graves and Matt Brophy work on special projects. Matt specializes in cryogenics and Roger with our conservation collections. And then Melissa, small picture down here, and Kieran, our knowledge mobilization. Katie runs our lab with Jacob and Lindsay, who are our main seed testing and seed collecting technicians. On with that, just a couple announcements before we get to our question period. Again, in the chat, so we've been asking you to put questions in the Q&A, but in the chat, if there are specific topics that you know that you would like a seminar in or a deck made for, maybe it's a specific species or a range of species or processes, please, you can type that in the chat and we'll take note. I'm hoping most of you have already seen that we are also running a Sizing Canada seed supply chain. Um, oh my God, I'm dropping words after all this talking.
Survey.
Thank you. And again, in the PDF, this is an active link in your PDF. If you haven't filled out our survey, you're taking about, there's a main survey and then 4 additional surveys. It would really help us to get a handle on the seed supply chain in Canada. And then you can also sign up for our MailChimp newsletter. And again, this is not a weekly newsletter. This is a couple of times a year where we can keep you up to date on upcoming activities that the Seed Center is involved in. And with that, we can open things up to questions and hopefully valid answers. Thank you.
Donnie, there's a question from Shannon that says, are there any initiatives for tall grass prairie species?
Yeah, so hi, Shannon. So our focus for us, and because we're working with the 2 Billion Tree Program, it is currently trees and shrubs. But anyone who was involved right from the beginning with the program understands that at first it was just trees. It was it's trees. But then as the program developed, and again, the program, I must say that the leaders of the program are very adaptive, and they realize that, you know what, there are shrubs that are needed as part of healthy forest ecosystems, and maybe those shrubs are needed to actually help establish a healthy forest ecosystem. So at this time, we're not experts in sedges and grasses and gramoids, so I can't really comment on what our involvement could be there. I don't know if anyone else wants to.
Donnie, Clement asks, with our ash species now threatened, what do we know about seed storage lifetimes for different ashes?
Yeah, so I'm going to let Melissa, I'll start, but Melissa can pick that up. So first of all, when we started, the National Tree Seed Center started in 2020. We knew that ash was going to be under threat, and Bernie, actually, who's on the call, Bernie was one of the head technicians at the Seed Center at that time. But the Seed Center jumped into action and started making collections from across the country. And one of the things I realized when I first came here in 2017, I was reaching out to seed centers and people were telling me, oh no, you can't store ash, so why bother? That is totally incorrect. If you collect seed at the proper time, you dry it down properly and store it properly, ash seed can be stored for a very long time. Melissa, if you have any data you want to share?
I was just pulling up my PDF because we provided this to Kasiwik recently, especially for black ash. So this question's come up quite a bit. So our sort of 90th percentile in every seed lot has sort of a genetic decline that can be unique. So it's hard to always make specific species determinations, but our 90th percentile of seed lots we've stored for white ash, we have about 25 years of viability that's in the high 90s. For black ash, we're at 15 to 25 years. And for green ash, we're also around 25 to 35. So it's always dependent on what we collected that was the oldest, but we've been improving our processes ever since. Good. And same for populus. I will say that most people also still assume that willow and poplar cannot be stored, but if you dry it sooner, you can we've had evidence of very similar lifespan, especially for, I think, big tooth aspen, Bernie, correct? Yes, great news.
As far as the aspens and the willows, if you collect them at the right time, process them quickly, dry them, freeze them, they're going to stay there as long as most other of call them the orthodox seed, those seed that can be dried. So it's the issue with the poplars and the willows, as Donnie mentioned, is that they don't last long in nature. A couple of weeks in nature, they're toast. But if you can treat them quickly, and properly and store them, they'll last a long time.
Tony, there's a question about funding. There's two, one in the chat, and then Shirley Thompson wrote what funding supports to do work on native trees and shrubs, Saskatoon berry. Is it too late, or how do we approach this? And then there was just a question from Don generally about funding for small scale growers in the chats.
So those are really good questions, and I'm going to provide an answer and hope that I don't get in trouble for the answer. But you're right. So I know in the 2 billion tree program, like the first call support was about trees. And then all of a sudden shrubs, a component of shrubs. So one of the things we've been working with the seed center, with the 2 billion tree program is about seed and the need for it. So all I can say is there are rumors that there will potentially be a call for proposal, that it's going to be in the works, that seed collecting is going, there will be a call for proposal come out next year regarding seed collection. So there's a lot of work to be done in it. And again, the 2 billion trees, I mean, there's so many aspects about seed collecting, about what should be covered and what can't be. But all I can tell you is that I know the 2 billion tree team in Ottawa have looked at this, and they've heard this frequently about seed collecting and the need for it and support, and it's strongly being considered right now.
Don asks, what about permits for collection? I find it very difficult in the Edmonton, Alberta area. I've been going back and forth for over 2 years with no results. So permits for seed collecting.
That is a good question. And again, every region of the country, things vary. All I can tell you is that we strongly encourage that you, well, not encourage, you do have to have the proper permits to do your seed collection. And again, if you want to reach out to us after the seminar, you know, maybe we have some, maybe we can do some digging and see if there's anything we can do to help you expedite that. Not that we have any power with the provinces, but we might be able to dig a little deeper for you and see what the holdup might be and why it's an issue in your particular region.
Annette asks, will you link projects and expertise across the country? For example, if I need seed for 20,000 seedlings, but see seed crop for 100,000 seedlings, will you advise me who might also be interested for efficiency?
Good. So I take it, if I'm reading that question right, is that you're collecting seed, you collect extra seed, and you want to know who else might be looking for that seed in your particular region? Is that the gist of the question?
I believe so.
Okay, so that's a good question. And I don't know if I have an answer for it. But one of the things that I can say that we're prepared to do, that if you do collect extra seed and you don't have a place to store that seed until you need it, then we can potentially store that seed here for you until you do need it. So until, again, if you needed 20,000 seed and you have an extra 80,000 seed, that again, that's where I come back to our MOUs, that we could sign an MOU saying that, yep, we will store that seed here for you until you have collaborators that need that particular seed for that particular ecosystem, and it's appropriate. Melissa, did you have anything extra on that?
Nope, just knowing who Manette works for. I'm hoping that Donnie's answer about, you know, the 2 billion tree program announcing that there's going to be some seed collection efforts and scoping will help answer some of that. So
it's Naren. I'm wondering if maybe I'll unmute Diogratis if he has an answer about the Alberta situation. He can unmute himself. There we go.
So you're asking about the permits to collect seed on public land?
Yes.
Well, yeah, so the standard requires any entity that does not have an implied permit to collect seed. For example, if you are a forest company doing mandated reforestation activities in your area, you already have that permission to collect seed in your area as part of your operational work. So that one does not require permission, but anybody else who doesn't have that obligation can collect seed from the public land only after obtaining a permission to collect. So you have to apply and get a permit to enter the forest and collect the seed for any reason. Does
Thank
that
you.
answer your question?
I think that that's what we've been saying, but I think the question was more that someone has been applying, but they haven't received. And again, I think that was the question. It's that they want to know what else they've applied, but they haven't received permission and want to know if there's anything else they can do.
So they can send an email to me, I can check, because that is not part of my work, but I know who to contact and to see if any application was sent and maybe just lost in the email, so I can check for them.
Perfect.
Deogratis, could you put your email address in the chat so they can contact you?
And again, one thing we continuously want to not harp and preach, but you know, it's a big country, and every province has its own set of rules and regulations. And before you get involved in seed collecting, before you get involved in this program, you really have to do your homework to make sure that you are making collections that are usable at the end. So to go out and make collections without the proper permits, and then only to find out that because you didn't go through the proper protocols, you can't use that seed, that would be fairly devastating, I would say.
Clement asks, in Ontario, the decline in beech trees has been very rapid. How good are the NTSC's beech seed collections?
Well, that's a really good question. And it's a sad answer that I'm going to give you. We have been looking, again, here in the East, you know, beech bark disease came in the East. We have a leaf miner, we have a weevil. There's all kinds of things hitting our East. So, you know, in the last 20 years, we have been keeping our eye looking for a good beech seed crop, and we have not found one. So I think there's a lot going on with our beech. It's being hit by so many stressors. And again, we have not found a good seed crop, you know, in the whole East, Ontario, right through Quebec to the Maritimes. And we have been looking for almost 20 years for a good crop. Every year we get bags and bags of beech seeds sent to us, and they're just empty. So that's one of the things, again, if you're getting involved in seed collecting, you know, take a seed collecting course or contact us before you go out, because cut testing your seed before you go out is very important. So again, beech seed, it can look so good on the tree, but if you did a cut test, you'd see that it's empty. So it's a real concern. And due to that concern, I mean, we have a couple of plantations that we put in back in the mid, like 2008, I believe it was, with disease-resistant beech. And we have found that our only really good cone crop or seed crops for beech when we did our own controlled crossing. Other than that, we haven't found good crops.
Can I add something, Donnie?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, another issue with the beech nuts that from the experience I had is that they don't store for a very long time. And we did some experiments at different temperatures, and they didn't last that long. So if they are collected, in my experience anyway, they should be used up fairly quickly.
And I think while we're waiting for any more questions just on that, so beech would be a prime example of a species that we would be looking to start a cryogenics project with, looking to see, because the seed doesn't store, it's being hit by so many factors. I would say that, you know, It's not listed anywhere because it root sprouts. So there's all kinds of beech out there, but the quality of it is really dropping. So, I think down the road, it might be something that's worth a cryogenics specific project to see if we can store the seed and genetics of our stands long term in another way.
Jennifer asks, is the NTSC accepting or contracting seed collectors for their storage and projects?
Yeah, so another really good question. It's a big country, and we have a small team that's located on the east coast of Canada. So as you can expect that, we, and especially the last couple of years, we really haven't gotten any farther west than southern Ontario. So the thing I can say for anyone who's doing contracts that, or they're in an area where there's lots of seed, good bumper crop years, is to contact us and let us know your location and the species that you potentially are looking to collect. And again, we do at the end, if we have funding available in our budget, then we do sometimes contract out collections for sure. Again, one of the things with the Seed Center is that even before the 2 billion trees, the investment into the Seed Center has been growing with CFS. There is this known, there is a seed supply shortage worldwide. And I think that's really our CFS, our local AFC, Atlantic Forestry Center, the CFS and NRCan has been supporting us more and more and more over the years. So all I can say is that, we would really like to eventually have a budget specific to pay contractors to go out for us, and we're working towards that. And just on that, well, if there's any more questions, so one of the things, again, we provide seed for research, but at this time, the first seed lots that come into us, it depends on the species, but we take the first 5,000 viable seed from any collection we get, and it goes into a conservation collection. Our goal is to have 20,000, minimum 5,000, but that's where our seed goes. And then seed other than that, it's available for research. So again, if you go to the National Tree Seed Center website, you can actually go through and you can see all the seed lots and collections we have there that are available for research. And there's over 13,000 seed lots listed in our research collection. Those are mainly single tree collections from across the range of the species.
Andrea asked, does seed collection take place in protected spaces, i.e. conservation areas, provincial and national parks?
Yeah, so another really good question. So again, for us, we need permits as well. If we're out on Crown land, or if we're invited in by provincial parks or by NGOs onto their lands, then we do collections. With Parks Canada, we do a lot of work with Parks Canada. And I would say up until the last 4 or 5 years, most of our collection of Parks Canada were sort of us knowing that there was a species in a particular park and us going through the permits to go into the park and do collections. We're working regional here in Atlantic Canada, but also with different regional parks. We do a lot of work with the Mountain Range National Park System for whitebark and limber pine. But what we're really looking to change for is getting the information out there, and then if there's a park or a group of parks that are looking for seed collection, whether it's to support 2 billion trees or maybe just for conservation, that we can work with them. So, maybe like in Atlantic Canada, we're looking to have a regional permit to work with Parks Canada for all the parks, for all species over, say, a 5-year period. So we'll go into a parks, we'll train staff, but again, we're available to them. And that's really just been in development in the last couple of years, but that's something that we're open to with any large organization.
Shannon also asked, how do we record seed collection if we are collecting from our own crops, not wild harvested? Is it the same?
Yeah, so is that seed orchard she's talking about, or planted stock that you're making collections from?
I would believe so. Planted stock, yeah.
Planted stock. So again, and this has to do with the evolving mandate of the National Tree Seed Center. So again, our collections have always been from wild stands. Again, we have research collections, so researchers need to know that the seed source where it came from, but then also our conservation collections. So our conservation collections are generally from wild stands. But we are finding, like say in an urban setting, if an urban, say Fredericton, New Brunswick, black walnut is not a native species here, but yet you'll find some really nice black walnut. So the city of Fredericton might be collecting seed from that. And we would say, well, yeah, if you're going to plant black walnut, it makes sense to collect seed from the trees that are already there, because you know that ecologically they survive. Those trees survive. The genetics of those trees survive. So if you're going to be planting more black ash or black walnut, then maybe we should be using seed sources that are already proven to do well in this environment. So it still is very important for measuring, for recording seed source on all of those collections. Again, we cannot process any seed lot that comes in unless we have that information of where it was collected from. But if you have a trail, a traceability, so you know the seed was, it was a seed orchard, and you know where that originated from, that also goes into our database. So we have traceability back to where the original population. Hopefully that answers your question. And on that, Melissa, if there's anything you wanted to.
I was just going to speak up and ask if, as we get towards the end, if there's anyone on the chat that wants to speak up as to being a regional seed processor. I know Brent Forbes made a comment, but if there's anyone else that would like to point towards regional groups that have capacity, this is kind of what this whole thing's about. So welcome that contribution. Dave has asked, what resources are available to help indicate collections that will be adapted to a future climate?
Did you want to go with that, or do you want me to?
Well, in BC, there's a great resource called the Climate-Based Seed Transfer System. In Ontario, there is an equal policy. In Quebec, there is policies that, you know, have been founded on extensive provincial or provenance testing. I would say that every province in Alberta as well has been testing out to try and find the limits of future adaptation. But for people that are beyond Crown land, what I would say is that we've had the most experience with working with Seedware. Seedware is a tool that looks for matches based on climatic similarity. So that would be the NRCan tool that's been promoted in other workshops. And a number of folks on the chat have probably used Seedware before. So beyond provincial rules about climate-based seed transfer, there's definitely a few resources that we can point people towards if they're looking, but everything until there's species-specific transfer functions and knowledge known, we typically recommend that people try to at least track and use ecozones and match those through planting, but it's an ongoing science. Donnie, do you have anything to add?
Nothing specific, but one thing, I guess one thing I can add is that, you know, our provincial seed centers and, you know, the nurseries that they work with, you know, they're very regulated on where seed can be planted. So seed is collected from particular seed zones or ecoregions, and there's reasons why it's planted back in those eco districts or in ones that are similar. And because it's dollars and cents, it's money. You don't want to be planting or using seed that's inappropriate. The 2 Billion Tree Program and the species they're using has a lot in common with some of the horticultural species that maybe you can go to your local box store and find. But the difference is those species up to now, they're not seed source. So when you go to a local box store, you don't know where that seed source came from. And one of the things that we're hearing through the program is that is not appropriate. And that is a big change. So it's going to change a little bit about how the horticultural organizations work, is because a lot of larger urban centers are now saying, hey, we want to make sure we are doing this ethically and using the right seed sources. And it's a change. And for us, anyone in the seed industry, it's a welcome change, I think, to see that, you know, communities and urban centers and NGOs and, you know, our parks and our, you know, communities are all really starting to see and understand the value of using appropriate, you know, adapted seed sources for wherever they want to plant. Well, we're waiting for another story. I love telling little stories. I was driving home last night and Stuart McLean was on CBC, and I didn't catch the title of his talk, but he was talking about this seed that he found in the seat, you know, if you know Stuart McLean, a seed that he found on the floor of his car. And he took that seed home and, you know, crazy things happened, but he planted it and he was transferring it so no one stepped on him. He planted it in the back corner of his lot. And after a week, he went out and it was a foot tall. And after 2 weeks, it was waist high. And it was a great story. And I was thinking, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And then at the end, found out it was a tree of heaven. Or is it tree of heaven? The invasive? And I was saying, oh, maybe this isn't such a great story, because it was an invasive species that was planted. And, you know, that's the things we're trying to stay away from, because invasive species, we have a view of invasive species. But then there's that side of invasive species about planting the wrong genotype or the wrong seed sources in certain areas. And that is a genetic invasion to some degree. That's my little story.
It's Naren. I just wanted to make one last pitch for anybody who's interested in more information or making contact about the Indigenous Seed Collection Program. I put my email in the chat. Please feel free, anybody that wants information. I know Josh already reached out. Anybody that wants information or wants to talk about the program, please feel free to contact me and we can set up a time to talk.
There's a question from Clement. I just want to make sure that I am reading it right. It says, who in Canada has the best projects or projections of ecozones 10, 20, 50 years from now? Appropriate seed sources relate to what the weather will be over the life of the tree.
I'm going to let Melissa, do you mind?
I'm just gonna go grab the plant hardiness site for plants in my area. There is a tool that follows, it's very general, mind you, it's climatic niches over 30-year periods from 1971 up to 2100. So you can type in your municipality or lat long, and then it will provide you a plant list. It is not exclusively native species. It includes non-natives as well, but it at least can give you an area or an idea of change over time and what will be sort of within full, or what they call the core range. So the kind of 5th to 95th percentile of what a species can tolerate. So I'm gonna put that in the chat. It's hard going between the chat and the Q&A. Yeah, and I'll acknowledge as well that a couple of the links that I shared the Ontario Transfer Policy Tool. Dave Krug and Dave Caltell have been sharing other climate tools. Seedware, the seed lot selection tool from the US has expanded. I forgot about that, thank you. The BC tools, I mean, Alberta and BC do have, and Quebec have some regulations as well that allow for climate transfer, but maybe DO can I think the FGRM was already posted, but in terms of interactive tools that are sort of accessible and understandable for the outside public, outside of forestry, regulations. There's not as many as there is, but I'd say that, yeah, Climate NA is great to play with. And Seedware is has less bioclimatic filters in it than the seed lot selection tool, in terms of there's only six climate factors that might force a plant to not live somewhere that you can toy with. The seed lot selection tool has a lot more options to play with, but plants in my area. Okay, I think is there any further questions? Thank you for everyone in the chat who's posted good links. This is great. We're going to capture everything.
No, and again, we really do appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to join us, and we hope that you found the information provided. Again, it wasn't meant to tell you everything you need. It was really just to get you thinking about tools and equipment you might need, and start thinking about, where you're going to find and purchase. As we go through our seminar series, so the next seminar on the spring collections, again, we will focus more specifically into the tools used in that process. And as we go along, and again, if there are specific presentations that you need for your group of and organizations that you represent, you can always reach out to us. Again, we do a lot of presentations on a smaller scale specific to clients' needs, and we'd be more than happy to do that with ample time to prepare.
I'll make one more point for letting us know what topics you would like into the winter to start working on. It takes us some time to gather all the pointed questions, but we will do that. And if really do encourage everyone, if you could take our surveys. They close April 30th. We know it's the busy season. Hopefully you can take 10-15 minutes to answer the most relevant ones to you, and we'll be in touch in terms of sort of jurisdictional voices and stories we're hoping for. And then our newsletter is going to be the main means of us trying to have direct contact with people going forward. So I can put those links again in the chat. And if Bernie has any final things to end with in French, or
nothing on my part. No, thanks.
okay.
Okay, I think we can close her down. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Lalier.